Well, hello and welcome to the Responsibility We Carry Athletic Support Service Learning Series. I am your co-host, Travis Ballard, and I currently serve as the N48 ECC Institutional Partnership Program Chair. And our other co-hosts are Mr. Quadro Steele, who serves as our co-chair for the ECC IPP Committee, and Ms. Lucy Mason, who serves as our ECC IPP Learning Series Director and Editor. Today, we bring you part 2 of our learning series on HBCUs, and we have a phenomenal woman, an innovative leader in intercollegiate athletic industry, and a great friend and a mentor of mine, but most importantly, just a great human being, just an individual that's always looking out for others. Ms. Christina Ruffin, Assistant AD of Academics and Student Services at Norfolk State University. Tina, it's good to have you on again.
Hey, welcome. You're an old friend of the series. We're going to jump right into this, right?
All right, so let's go. I'm excited. Thank you all for having me.
Well, Tina, we've talked about this in our conversations, whether that's at the national convention, whether we've just talked about our experiences of being at HBCUs. We know the systemic forces that challenge HBCU administrators and their work environments and the decisions, the resource decisions that they have to make for their student athletes. But we rarely talk about how it positively impacts the HBCU administrators being at HBCUs. We want to know, how has being at a HBCU positively impacted your job and professional career?
I love it. To be perfectly honest, I think when I first came into this field, like everybody, like the Power Fives and the PWIs are like the glitz and glam. And so coming out of Georgia State, where I got my master's, I really wanted to go to a PWI Power Five and then come back to a HBCU. So I knew that I always wanted to be at a HBCU. I just never thought I would have started and have stayed as long as I have. But I love the fact that my student athletes look like me and I look like my student athletes. And I think that is a big component of the positivity of being at an HBCU, the comfort and the care that we give to the students. They see people that look like them. They have people advocating that look like them. And I think we talked about in the previous series, just everything that's happened since COVID and the Black Lives Matter. 700 Park Avenue is like a safe haven to them. I think HBCU campuses, we didn't have to go through COVID and that pandemic of racism. I don't know if I could have done it at a PWI, to be perfectly honest. So that was nice. That I just love being here and I get to support and advocate students who are looking to me as someone that looks like them.
You mentioned the other COVID pandemic, right? And we know that prior to that, some of the issues and challenges HBCUs were looked at by the NCA in terms of APR challenges. And then post George Floyd, there was this outpouring of how can we help you all? And HBCUs became the hottest thing on the planet to help. Right. And I remember you and myself, and we talked to Dr. Lavalace and saying, well, we could help y'all. And that phone doesn't necessarily ring the other way around. There aren't PWIs calling us and saying, hey, how can you help us with our Black student athletes and some of the issues we're having? Do you feel like the experience and expertise of HBCU administrators is highly valued in the academic support or student development space?
I can say that the needle is moving. I can say that. Is the needle moving fast? Not sure. But has the needle moved? I can say absolutely. Even just thinking about this podcast and this conversation that we're having today, I remember, I think it was 2004 when Kim Durant was the president and Jean Boyd was the vice president. And at that time, Jackie Nicholson, who was my supervisor at the time at Norfolk State, was looking to advance in her career. And I remember just sitting at the opening conference or session, and I was like, Jackie, come up there with me and let's talk to them, because there's no reason why you should be overlooked the way that you have. And I remember going up, never meeting Miss Kim before, never knowing Jean Boyd and Kim Durant at the time. I think I was 3 years in. I just had Elle the summer before, and we had the conversation and the dialogue started. And I think since then, The board and the leadership of N4A has been making very intentional decisions so that those that work at a HBCU are seen as everyone else on the same playing field. Again, do I think the needle has moved at a rate that we would like to see at Quadjo? I don't think so, but I think it is moving. And I think we just have to continue to show up in those spaces and continue, whether we show up because we're invited or we are forging ourselves into those spaces and saying that you have to deal with me. Like, I'm going to be in this conversation. You're going to hear what I have to say. And just knowing that the work that we're doing at our campuses, we're still producing the same results that you all are. With the limited resources, the limited staff, all the pushback that we have to go through because everybody's getting pulled in a million and one directions. But knowing that, hey, like you said, we are the experts dealing with students that look like us.
You know, in your intro, we talked about how you were a former student athlete at a HBCU. And I'm curious if you feel a different level of responsibility being that you went to an HBCU and now you are an administrator at a HBCU.
Absolutely. And just a little bit about my background. I was a two-sport athlete. And so I never thought I was going to go to a HBCU. I am an Aggie alum, Aggie born, Aggie bred. I've never missed a homecoming. But I was a softball student athlete. Softball was my first love, and I was going to go to UNC Chapel Hill. And so my cousin had a friend, a really close friend that went to UNC, and just the conversations I was having with her, and she understood that I wanted to be around students that looked like me because I went to a private school where I was the only one. And she told me, she's the reason why I didn't go to Carolina. She said, Tina, if you want to be with students that look like you, don't come here. And so that's how I ended up at A&T. How I got my scholarship for tennis. They were down here in Norfolk to play, and I was just hitting with one of my friends that was on the team, and that's how I got my scholarship for tennis. But I remember even at A&T, we had a lot of coaching change. And so my first coach being an African-American, and then our second coach being a white man, it was different. It was a lot of difference, a lot of things. I learned about Title IX as being a student athlete and was advocating back then, and understanding like some of these conversations are still like, that's not how you should approach people. That's not how you should talk to people. And so I think I've just carried that to what I do now. I advocate for anybody that I see is being underserved or having a disservice. I really try to advocate for them. And so that's probably the biggest part of my job that I do love. I fight those battles in those rooms and get people upset, but just to do the right thing by people across the board. And so when I play tennis, of course, tennis is not one of those money sports or at the top of the totem pole. We're kind of at the bottom. And so you fight for the little dogs that don't really have a voice.
We're talking about in our field, particularly, and you've been in this field for a while, a lot of the reconstruction that had to be done in terms of getting campuses to the same speed as our other resources. Can you, one, talk about what it took for you to reconstruct the sort of academic support programs at Norfolk particularly, but any other place you've been in, and then some of the pain that comes with that. And we talk a lot of, we've been through it, right? Where you do all this work and then you have to kind of expose yourselves along the way and deal with some stereotypes along the way. Can you talk a little bit about, one, that reconstruction, and two, some of the pain that came with it?
Absolutely. So when I got to Norfolk State in 2011, Jackie, who's our amazing N4A president, was at Norfolk State, and she had been here, I believe, 3 years as a staff of 1. And so then I was hired, and now we were a staff of 2. And so I got here August of 2011. In January of 2012, we were hit with our first data review. And so me being new to the fold, I always tell people I had amazing training at Georgia State with Dina Freeman Patton, who's now the AD at Morgan, and Keisha Jones, who is provost at a community college in North Carolina now. So I had amazing training in the foundation in this field from my time at Georgia State. And so coming to Norfolk State and seeing, like you said, the holes. And when we come through a data review, it exposes that tremendously. And so really getting campus on board. And so it's kind of interesting at Norfolk State. We went through the first data review in 2012. They didn't post our results. So we had the results in-house, like we knew it. But of course, we're not going to air our dirty laundry, right? And so, of course, like our president and like our constituents on campus knew, but like the campus body and faculty and staff really did not know everything that came out of the data review. But working really closely with our registrar, we were putting things, policies and procedures in place to mitigate the issues that came out of the first data review to ensure that we would never have to go through that again. And so 4 years went past and the NCAA never published our results. 4 years went past, they published our results and got hit with another data review. And so when the results got published, of course, now campus knows, everybody knows, but they didn't understand what we had put in place within the 4-year period to ensure that we would never be in that situation again. So whether it was like major changes or working closely, having an eligibility specialist that I had transitioned to during this time period after the second data review, but just creating that position. So Tiffany Sykes, who was in that position when it first was created, who is now the AD at FAM, having that position to help with certification and working closely with the registrar and the departments. So we were laying the groundwork within that 4 years. And so to have to explain the data review 4 years post, and then your campus gets told they have to do another one. And then our second one, of course, went a lot smoother. We came to the second one. I was an assistant AD at that time, hiring a new staff, doing summer bridge. And at that time, I was really a staff of 1, plus our bowling coach at that time who worked part-time, and I was hiring people, hiring staff. And so Ivana had came in that March, but that summer she was out, she had given birth to her daughter. And so really having to do that second data review, but understanding like, compared to our folder for the first one is like this thick and the second one is like this. So seeing the progress was what I was able to convey to campus, like understand that this happened 4 years ago. No, you guys weren't privy to it, but these were the things that we were putting in place so that we would never be in this situation again. And now coming out of the second one, you could see the improvement from that 5 year, 6 year time period. And so that's something that you never want to go through a data review, but to say you went through it and you went through it twice, it's almost like you got 2 World Series rings. Like I done been through it twice, survived them both. Like what else can I not take on? So I always use that as a positive, that going through the data review allowed us to change our internal operations so that we could be better and really put us back on the platform where we should belong, which is side by side with Power Fives and PWIs and not underneath.
That leads exactly into, one of my thoughts on it. So I'll ask you to, either agree or oppose. One of the things that I've been at data reviews in a PWI and at an HBCU. And one of the things that you understand through that process, and I've been in this a long time, that nobody knows certification, right? Everybody does it differently at every place, and there are holes at every place. And what I learned about when you have to build, a support program and you find those issues, you really become the expert, right? That those are positive transitions that should happen on a campus, because most campuses don't understand collegiate eligibility. They don't do it for any other students other than student athletes, right? Do you think that we told the story wrong? Instead of saying that the MEAC and SWAC schools have formed these powerful expertise through data reviews, as opposed to we're doing something wrong, or especially when you go infractions, people think cheating. Do you think we could have told the story better that we are now experts in certification through data reviews versus, we have done something wrong?
I think that's kind of twofold. I think to personally, we have told our story. I think we have. I think it's how it comes out when it's published from the NCAA and up top. We can't control the narrative that they try to push if they are trying to push a narrative. But I think when you go through certification, I love certification. If anybody knows me, I love puzzles. I love numbers. Certification to me is like numbers. And I think it becomes complicated when people are trying to circumvent what it's supposed to do. So if I don't have a student making the numbers, what can I do? What bylaw, but 6, 18, 24, 48, 72, 120. It's very simple. When you look at it like that, to me, and I mean, to somebody else, it could be different. Maybe it is a lot of different pieces. But I think certification and the data review, when people are afraid to expose, or they're not as willing to be open and vulnerable, I think that's when the defenses come up and they make it seem like, oh, this data review was such a bad thing. Where for me, it was like, okay, let's learn from this and let's build correctly. Like, let's lay the foundation correctly so that when you set the precedent to the department, like, we're not going to sit here and we don't have the compliance staff to find the loophole that is under the blanket that is here that will satisfy this one student. And so to me, it just safeguards the whole department. And so that's how I looked at the data review. I love certification. And so we're still trying to hire an eligibility specialist. And so it's like, okay, I don't mind doing it, but it is a lot. I think eligibility specialists don't get the credit they deserve. I think because it is a new role, but the amount of work and the attention to detail is very important. But I feel like HBCUs are doing a better job at telling our story. We need now allies to come and walk with us and tell the story and not be combative or not continue to, oh, y'all are good, but. So this is just a little story. So even when APR went from 925 to 930, and they gave HBCUs the safeguard for 3 years, I was telling Jackie, like, why do we need a safeguard? Because the safeguard, even though it's looked at to me as they were looking at it, okay, it will give y'all time, but it also contributes to the narrative that we were not able to do what everybody else was tasked to do. And so I was very proud to say, like, just keep saying, our teams that are at 930, as soon as y'all change from 925 to a 930, we have been at a 930. I just had to do APR analysis for all of our teams per our AD. And when I was able to look through all the data, it's the COVID year that has hurt us. And when you have small squad sizes, 2 points will take you down to an 8 something, and then that's going to affect the 930. But I think sometimes when the NCAA gives HBCUs and limited resources these safeguards, it also helps the narrative that we are unable, or our students are unable to perform at the expectations that you have set for the whole NCAA in athletics.
As you've gone through these data reviews and you have this wealth of knowledge and experience in the field, I'm curious, what pressures have you felt maybe as a result of those stigmas around HBCUs and our students and our practitioners? Have you internalized any of that pressure? What do you try to do to combat it?
I'll say we did have a situation this past year where with COVID and our grading system went from P to P minus and all of this stuff, that I think the pressure for me that I have always had is like, you can't make a mistake. And so when you make a mistake, the backlash of that. But like Quadra, so everybody makes a mistake, like, especially when it comes to certification. So for me, that's the thing that that kind of not scares me, but is the worst part of the job, is that when you make a mistake and you find the mistake, and now for me, I could never sit on anything. So I had like having to come and say, this is the mistake. We have to file this violation. He is now ineligible, and having to now answer those questions to the coach. And understanding like sometimes you won't have that space where you have somebody that is supportive of you or that is advocating for you while you have made the mistake and that you're correcting it. I've been blessed at Norfolk State to have that support. And there's been times where I haven't had the support. So that is probably like my biggest worry, is when mistakes are made, the reaction or the response from higher up.
I've sat in some of those same rooms, right? And, we talk about, at every school, and you mentioned perfectly that certification is just math, right? It's these numbers, even though our campuses haven't always figured that out in their departments, but you have math, and then you have the situations that you get put in that make you stretch the rules or try to figure out the math in a way that the math ain't math. You know what I mean? Right. And we don't talk about those kind of external pressures. Can you talk a little bit about our missions of our universities? One of the things I've talked about is our student athletes are not much different than our students.
Yep.
And they are bringing things that aren't unique at PWIs, because again, we have things that are dedicated or trying to dedicate to support these students. But if it's 20% of your population at a PWI, it's 90% of our population at an HBCU.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about how you function and what people should know about the student athletes that we're working with and the unique feats that you pull off to be at a 975 with what the types of students and backgrounds that the missions of our schools not require, but encourage us to work with?
I think when you look at HBCUs and just the history of HBCUs, a lot of our students are still first gen in 2023. And then you look where HBCUs are placed, right? We have housing projects all around like Norfolk State. And even when I was at A&T, a lot, it's right there in Central as well. And it's so funny because one of my coworkers just came in and was like, well, Tina, what is the GPA requirement now? And so Norfolk State, until this year, because we raised it a little bit, was a 2.3. And so you think about like a 2.3 is what you barely need to make to become an athlete. And so when you look at, like you said, Quadjo, maybe 10 or 20% of student athletes at PWIs have either a 2.3 or below, or what's their average, right? Our average GPA coming out of high school might be like a 2.5, 2.7. And so you look at that, you look at the kids that we have. And I said this during, like, we go back to the Black Lives Matter and COVID, when I had L in 2013. And so in 2013 was Trayvon Martin. And so my whole maternity leave, I watched the Trayvon Martin case from sun up to sundown. So you think that was 10 years ago when these kids were like 8 and 10, and that's all they know. So you have that. And then you have the, how do I say it? The pressures that we put on athletes now in recreational sports. And I have to remind myself, like, I just have to keep myself busy. Elle had a game last night and I was pretty much on the phone, so I would not yell and scream and be that parent. And so you think about like these kids, they've been through so much since before they even step on campus. the expectation, they've always been praised. And so when they come here and they're not praised on the athletic field or whatever sport they're playing, and the effect that that takes on their academics, and then they're already behind academically, and we are a staff of 3, right? And we have 1 learning specialist. She came from secondary education. She was a former student athlete, but this was her first year as being a learning specialist. And I told her from day 1, I have no clue how to be a learning specialist. I can't help you. I can just give you to the GOAT, which is Shanika Munchin. And so that is who I have partnered her with and mentored. But even Shanika mentioned to her, like, her caseload is 20. And it's as a first year learning specialist, but that is in 20 was student athletes that had below a 2.0 from the previous semester. And so you just think that we are doing amazing work at HBCUs, because at PWIs, y'all might have, one advisor might have 2 at risk or 3, but ours, we have maybe 90% of a team that needs constant one-on-one and resources and programming. And then it's combating them like, you have to come to this program. You have to meet with the learning specialist. You have to come to study hall. You have to do this. It's more the mental exhaustion, I think, that we have at HBCUs is very unique. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. Or I think, I'm really honest, I think professionals that come from an HBCU excel at PWIs. I remember there was somebody that was at Central. They were doing student athlete development, and they went to Washington with Kim Durant. And I remember her saying, like, Tina, he has a budget, but he is finding stuff for free, all of this stuff, like pulling. And I said, Kim, we have to do that. Like, he probably never even had a budget, but she just always praised him, like how amazing his work was, like his work ethic. So I think professionals that come from HBCUs excel at PWIs, and I can't always say the same for people coming from a PWI to an HBCU. And I think when they do try and when they do come, I think that's where the respect comes up. I think they realize all that we have to do to make sure our students are successful. And I think they understand that we're more than advisors to our students. A lot of the times our students might be somewhere they're not, and they're calling us to come pick them up, whether it's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of us do. So I think that's the unique caveat.
I loved in the earlier response, we talked about the values of HBCUs, particularly on your career. I know from a political standpoint, we're seeing an institutional effort to erase Black culture, to erase Black identities, including HBCUs. I would love to know from your perspective the value of HBCUs and why they're still needed.
Yes, HBCUs are needed. There's so much that come from HBCUs. Like the true community of an HBCU, you'll never find it at a PWI. But you see PWIs that want it. But I think just the values that you get out of HBCU, the community, the family, the relationships, that you're not a number at an HBCU. You're actually a name. Your professors know you. Campus knows you. So if they do see you slipping, you have motherly figures and fatherly figures there to guide you back and not just watch you fade away because they have somebody else coming in.
We talked about the story question in the motherhood series, but I'm going to take a different angle, and you can answer briefly where HBCUs. You're talking about how we're viewed differently and how people need to understand what story do HBCUs need to get together and tell on their own? And what are some things that they need to look intrinsically at and say, we need to set the standard here? So if they could write their own story, what's the trend that they needed to be sending and not be trying to copy from other institutions?
I definitely 100% believe that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done at HBCUs, especially in athletics. And at some point we have to start helping ourselves before we can ask other people to help us. And so there's a standard as HBCUs in athletics as a department, not just academics, but as a department, we definitely have to raise our standard. I'm not saying we are perfect. We are far from that. We definitely have to raise our standard for that respect, whether that's the weight room. Like we just lost 2 kids in basketball because we can't provide them NIL deals. Like we have to continue to stay like in the race, so right now I feel like we're dragging behind and we've made so many progressions. I feel like and I just had this conversation, academics, I think we are up there with everybody else. We have to be like academics is the foundation to all athletics. If student athletes are ineligible, there's no student athlete, there's no athletics. But I think as a department, like everything else has to get to that same standard. But is there a standard for other departments? If you think about it, it's really only academics that has the standard that's across the board. Like, does it say like your weight room has to be this and body fat percentages have to be this across the board for a student athlete? So things of that nature. I think fundraising is a big part, like alumni support is a big part. And so that is where we can help ourselves. I think we have to become better in those areas so that the department is respected. Because I think there are areas in the department that are respected, but as a whole, I think that's where HBCUs get looked upon. And so I think for us, Quadjo and Lucy and Travis, I think we're always advocating for the academics. And so maybe academics is up here, but then it's like, we got to pull the other areas of our department. I think that's probably the biggest thing of why HBCUs.
So amazing, an even playing field in all areas.
Yeah.
That's part of the student athlete experience. Well said.
And we have to, and really, if you think about it now, I think this generation, a lot of it comes down to pay. We have to figure out a way to pay people what they're worth. You look at Norfolk State, ODU is 4 miles down the street. Their department size is bigger. Their alumni giving is bigger. Like all of that, their sponsorships are bigger and we're in the same area. So how can they have this sponsorship and we don't? We don't need it at the same monetary value, but why? So that's the part of the story that I think is lacking. So not academics not telling the story, but as a department, the department isn't telling their story in a way that people want to give. And at this point, I'm kind of afraid that we've missed, like you said at the beginning, Quadro, like HBCU was the hot topic during COVID and the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And that was the time to really hit, like, tell our story, get our name out, get in front of these people who are wanting to give to these HBCUs. But I think that is where HBCUs have to rise. And I feel one is we have to have a budget where we can pay people a comparable salary to an ODU to have them come work at Norfolk State.
So one of the last questions we'll ask is, what is one thing that HBCU administrators need to hear more of and one thing they need to hear less of?
The mother one was easier than this one. Let's see. Or I think working at an HBCU, it has to be a call and it has to be this has to be your purpose. Because it's not easy. The typical 8 to 5 is never going to happen. Just working in academics is never going to happen. Just working in business is never going to happen. Just working in compliance, you're going to work all across the department. And that's one thing that I do love, because I will get bored just doing academics. So I love doing the marketing. I love doing external relations. I love doing game day op, but I love doing it for like a day or months. I don't want that to now have to be the norm because we have done it. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that I wish will stop at a HBCU. And I just said it the other day, like our external affairs office has gone from 0 to 3 people in 4 months. And so why is the expectation for everybody else to still step in when now they are fully functioning department? And so I think the expectation of that job, other duties assigned, I think is sometimes like no, like I just want to, I get paid to do this job and I want to do this job really well. And I want to be respected for this job and not have to feel as if I have to do more to justify my position at this organization.
We just have one question, and we
Okay.
asked it in the other one. What's a responsibility that you carry as an HBCU administrator that you wouldn't give up?
I will continue to advocate for HBCUs at the national level and wherever I'm at, because I mean, I am a product of an HBCU, and I've been here. This is where I have been, and I have enjoyed every minute of it. Not every day has been great, but I have learned a lot about myself, and it has shaped me into the professional, the woman that I am, being here at Norfolk State. And so I will continue to advocate and speak up. And I feel like we are getting in the academic realm, and I wish there could be standards for all departments. And I think that will help HBCUs because academics, again, we are the foundation of athletics. So we have to meet these requirements and standards by the NCAA. But I'm just going to keep advocating. I'm not going to stop. And I think that continuing to show up is what's needed. I told Jackie I did my leadership role with ECC and HBCU, so I got that off. And so now I just love being a part of all the committees. I love just being involved. And I think getting more people involved, then the rest of our organization will see you and start respecting you. So I appreciate this. Like I've had more speaking engagements this year than ever before. Outside of athletics at local high schools in DC. And so I just know, just continue to stay on the path that God had called me to stay on. And knowing that we don't do this work for recognition. I think we all like, it really is a service work. We're here for our student athletes. And so just continue to serve. I think when you stop serving, that's when you get real frustrated.
Tina, thank you so much. And I mean, just like in our intro, we mentioned your expertise and acumen, but you know, through this series and things that I innately knew about you, I think it just brought to light in this series about your service work. You're a service leader and a humanitarian, most importantly, and a wonderful mother, as we've talked about in our previous series. So we just want to thank you so much for being on. We want to also thank and acknowledge the ECC subcommittee that has supported this initiative, our ECC chair, Brother Ramon Cooper, for his support, and one of our previous interviewees who was on our motherhood series, Shanika Mungeon, who's also been a supporter of this initiative, who's also on our N4A board of directors, and Ms. Jackie Nicholson, who is serving as our N4A president for the 2022-2023 academic year. So until next time, take care.